Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and today we'll be coming to you from the beautiful Books and Sundry shop in Plymouth, Massachusetts. We are so excited that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Erin Petti. She'll be joining us to celebrate the peculiar hauntings of Thelma B. Before we take you to Books and Sundry in Plymouth, Massachusetts, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by the Cryptid Catcher by Leah Fitzger. Do you want to get your kids off their screens and into reading this summer? There's no better way to do that than by introducing them to a rollicking, fun adventure about the search for myths, monsters, legends, and beasts. Leah Fitzger's The Cryptid Catcher explores a magical, mythical world of cryptids, or legendary animals that might be real. Creatures like Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, and the Snarlygaster. Join Clivo in the Myth Blasters as they travel the world searching for these hidden creatures, all while doing their best to outsmart the bad guys and save the world. The Cryptid Catcher received a starred review from Booklist. It's a Junior Library Guild Gold selection, and it's appropriate for kids ages 8 to 13. Get your copy today. The Cryptid Catcher by Leah Fitzger. This episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is also brought to you by The Adventures of Harry and Friends, the wonderful picture book series by Sarah Belisa Tucker. Hey, is your child shy? Does your child have difficulty making friends? Do your kids worry that no one will like them? Well, you can teach your kids to have confidence in themselves and to embrace who they are. Grab a copy of The Day I Met My Best Friend. It's book number 1 in the Adventure of Harry and Friends series. This is really a wonderful series that will inspire your kids' imagination, help them develop their moral compass, set positive examples in their life, and prepare them for life's real challenges. Get the entire set to add to your family library. The Adventure of Harry and Friends by Sarah Belisa Tucker. You're going to learn out more by going to theadventuresofharryandfriends.com. Right now, we're going to travel to beautiful Plymouth, Massachusetts, to the beautiful Books and Sundry shop in downtown Plymouth, Massachusetts. Erin!
Yes.
How are you?
Oh, I'm so good. I'm so happy to be here, Jedley.
Isn't this fun? We get this nice audience here and this beautiful bookshop, and I'm really excited.
It's a gorgeous day.
It is.
Yes.
And I can't wait for you to tell us all about the peculiar haunting of Thelma B. Please.
Sure thing. So, The Peculiar Haunting of Thelma B. This is the cover. So, it is a story about an 11-year-old girl who lives in Massachusetts who is very science-minded. So she loves adventure and experimentation. Her mom's a scientist and an adventurer. And she thinks about things in terms of the scientific method. Mm-hmm. But one day, something happens in her life that is extremely unscientific. Her dad owns an antique shop, and one day a strange-looking old lady walks into the antique shop with a jewelry box that she wants to sell to him. And he buys it and takes it home. But no one knows that inside the jewelry box is a ghost. And it's not just any ghost, it's a ghost who knows Thelma. And it's a ghost who has a plan. So the ghost kidnaps Thelma's father, and Thelma has to team together with a local bunch of ghost hunters, kind of like real do-it-yourself guys, and they have to figure out what the mystery is, how they can unlock the box, get her dad out. And in the meantime, Thelma figures out some really unique things about her family and who she is on the inside.
Cool.
Yeah.
Really cool.
Thank
You know, as you were talking about this 11-year-old girl who lives in Massachusetts, I immediately thought of my daughter when she was 11. And she was really into ghosts. When she was in 3rd grade, so a little earlier than that, she discovered the TV show Ghost Hunters.
Oh, yes.
And she wanted to watch it, but no one else wanted to watch it with her. And she couldn't watch it by herself.
It can be scary.
Yeah. So I sat down and said, "Oh, I'll watch it with you, kid." And then for the next 5 years, that and reading together was our go-to.
I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so fun.
And in all those episodes, they never once found a ghost. I was really bummed out.
But you keep going back for more. There's enough there. Yes, there are some amazing ghost hunting shows. Ghost Adventures is one of the ones that I really like too, and that's I think on the Travel Channel. Okay. And that's like 3 like dudes, you know what I mean? Like they're real dudes and they like are tough dudes, but when a ghost comes around, sometimes even really tough dudes get pretty scared, and that's fun to see.
Yeah. I'm not a really tough dude, but I do scare the ghosts. You're part of the Spooky Middle Grade Authors Group. That's how I got to know you.
Yes.
Erin and her other Spooky Middle Grade authors came together to create an original story exclusively for the podcast. And it was a really neat creation process. I gave them a prompt, just one sentence. And then they each took turns. I think there were 6 different authors, 6 or 9.
I think so.
And so they would each one would write 2 or 3 paragraphs and pass it on. And the people, would not know what happened in the rest of the story until they came together to read it. And It was really, really fun. That was released on Halloween this past year. So you should check that out on our archives. What draws you to spooky writing?
It's a really interesting question because even when I try to write something that's not so spooky, a ghost shows up. You know what I mean? Like, I think that there's just something about questions about what comes next, what's really out there that it's so fascinating to me. And I was not super duper brave as a kid, wanting to see this stuff. This is my mom's in the audience, and she was like, "No, you weren't." But as an adult, I think there's something maybe even about being really afraid and then being on the other side of it and managing the elements and building the world that feels really good and empowering too. And I also think in middle grade in particular, when we're in that I think it's, I just love middle grade. It's this amazing space where you're dealing with. When you're in that age of 8 through 13, you're dealing with things that are real world concerns, adult concerns, and at the same time, you are very much still in the world of childhood. So you can take magical elements and you can take real life stresses and you can bend them and twist them and you can make something that everyone can relate to. And I think there's something so beautiful about that in between space that you get to really play in when you're in middle grade. I mean, even if I wasn't writing middle grade books, I read them all the time. It's because it's what I love so much.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Is there somebody that was the inspiration for Thelma B?
So this is a kind of a multi-part question. So the name Thelma is my dear, dear, dear amazing late grandmother, her name. And I thought that was such an amazing name. And she was a really cool, strong lady. So it was a cool, amazing, loving, strong lady with an absolutely 1 in a million name. And I was like, gotta grab the name. The character herself, though, is a little bit of an amalgam of, just almost like who I wish I could have been, maybe, more than who I was in middle school. Thelma is all the stuff that usually kind of clogs up the drain in middle school. People's the way you feel about the way you look, and your shoulders start to hunch because you don't want anyone to look at you, and Thelma just doesn't have that reflex. Thelma's like, you don't like it? It's your problem. I'm amazing. I'm here doing great work every day. If that's something that doesn't please you, then you're in your lane and I'm in mine. And that is. To me, writing that was really fun because as a kid, I didn't feel like that. Mm-hmm. I felt the way a lot of middle grade kids feel.
We've talked a lot on the podcast about that age And one of the things I remember from my son, there was one particular van ride where everybody was in the back seat, and they were all trying to prove to each other that they knew what was going on, and none of them had a clue. And I actually said, "Goes, guys, you can relax because none of you guys have a clue. Just relax and enjoy each other's company." But it's that age group. They're trying to find themselves, and I'm an adult 1 minute, no, I'm a kid, and that kind of going back and forth.
And it's the expectations are like, you're an adult, like, hey, why'd you do that silly thing? Like, you're 12 years old. And then at the same time, like, no, I'm sorry, you can't do this, this, and this, you're just a kid. And it's like, the inputs and outputs are confusing, too. Like, we're expecting middle grade kids to be adults in so many ways, and then, but not 100%. So it really is a time of confusion, inside and then outside too, like the kind of feedback you're getting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have to ask, you love writing spooky books, you love ghosts.
I do.
Have you ever encountered any yourself?
Okay, so...
Oh, there's a story here.
There's a story here, but this is the closest I've ever come to encountering a ghost. So I was talking, so we're on the Plymouth waterfront. I've worked for Plimouth Pawtuxet. I just can't get enough of being around people in costume. I just can't. And in college, I worked at the House of Seven Gables, which is in Salem, Massachusetts. And it's a historical house. And at that time, I don't know if they do this anymore. I dressed up every day in like Edwardian garb with like the puffy, like the silk shirt and the puffy shoulders. And I would give guided tours of the house, this very, very old colonial house. And my other grandmother, who's also amazing, both of them making an appearance today, thank you, Peggy came along, and she had a friend who was a psychic medium. And her psychic medium friend came along with her to my tour. So we did the whole thing, and like it was super fun, and we went up the secret staircase into the attic where the dollhouse is, and we come back down, and afterwards she grabs my hand and says, "I want you to know that in the attic, you were joined by a young girl who was a ghost, and she was wearing a white nightgown, but I don't want you to freak out because she really liked that you were there. So she wasn't upset by your presence. She was like, she really loved your presence." I was like, "Oh, thank you for not telling me that when I was trying to give a tour, because that would have freaked me out." But like afterwards I was like, all right. So I didn't even know it, but apparently I did have a close encounter with a ghost.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you ever think about that ghost on the next tours that you were giving?
Forever, and for the rest of the time I was there, I was just like, "Hey, girl, we're all friends here. Just talking about your cool dollhouse."
It's funny, here in Plymouth, I worked here in Plymouth many decades ago at a residential treatment center for kids who were young offenders. And we were right on the shores of Bloody Pond in Manamet. And we're different than most detention centers. We didn't have any locks or bars on the windows. And we never had a kid try to run away. And it wasn't because we were so great and those kids were so motivated. They would always ask, "Why is the pond called Bloody Pond?" And we told them some story about the Native Americans who lived here before we were there, and they would not go outside at night.
Powerful.
It was.
The power of story.
Power of
My
story.
gosh.
It is. But you're right. You bring up something important. Story is so very powerful right now. Were you aware of the power of story when you started writing?
I think because I've been so fascinated with stories since I was so young, I think that it's always something that I've known. I teach a writer's workshop, and one of the second graders the other day is reading Wings of Fire by Tui Sutherland, and he can't get enough of these books. They're so good. And he was just talking to me, and he's like, I just start reading, and then sometimes it's like I pay attention all of a sudden, and we're in the middle of math, and I didn't know that we stopped reading. And it's because he's so involved, and I remember feeling like that as a kid. So I feel like if you're a kid and you really get into stories and you love to read, it's kind of like you know how powerful they can be.
Yeah. Hey, did you always envision yourself becoming an author?
I always knew I wanted to write in some way, and I think that the idea of writing a whole book felt a little not silly, but a little wild. Who writes a book? have you seen these things? They're huge, right? So it's like, that seems like audacious. Like, I didn't dare to think I would, like, really write a book. And then when I was in high school, I was writing, like, plays for my high school and stuff, and that was, like, a really fun thing to do, and a really fulfilling and meaningful thing to do. And I thought maybe I would write plays. And then kind of life went on, and I was like, okay, maybe I'll work in book publishing. And I did that a little bit, and maybe I'll be and everything kind of always kept coming back to this, like, little seed of, like, yeah, but why don't you write a book? You know, maybe you could just do it. And I actually, I remember I was in my office building, and there was a motivational daily calendar. This is when I was thinking about starting writing a book, but I hadn't started yet. And it said, like, something to the effect of, like, what if, like, 1 year from today, if you start the thing you're thinking about today, 1 year from today, where will you be? Versus if you don't. And it was just kind of like, oh, okay. And then I just started. I started that day.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It's, you know, every journey begins with that first step.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned high school, and I also know that you graduated from Emerson College.
I did.
And this summer I have, talk about a lucky guy, I have a number of students from Emerson interning for me this summer.
Amazing.
And one of them, Nicole, came up with some questions. She was, by the way, so excited that you graduated from Emerson.
That's awesome.
She wants to know, how do you balance writing stories full of suspense and supernatural elements with themes that most young people can relate to, such as friendship? And she also wants to know how to incorporate the heavier topics into your books for young readers.
So I think that when you start, I think, and this is just me speaking for me, when I start to write in the perspective, even if it's third person, but in the world, in the perspective of someone who's 11 years old, I put myself back into the headspace a little bit. And intrinsic in that, like, all of that stuff is just there. It's just already there. The environment and the feelings of being in a group of people and all of that kind of stuff. Like heavier topics. And it's interesting because in the second book, so the Thelma B. in Toil and Trouble is coming out in September. And it was cool because in the second book, I feel like I do get to go a little bit deeper into the intricacies of, like, who she really is inside. Like, after she's, a daughter and a friend and all this, like, who is she, like, on the inside? And does that bring up some of these, like, stresses that maybe we don't talk a lot about, like maybe, like, stress with her mom, who she idolizes, but, like, no relationship is perfect, and when you're now turning 12 years old, maybe things start to feel a little different. And I think that, like, the age itself and the perspective itself, like, you don't have to come in with a hammer with the issues. The issues grow up out of the characters themselves. And also, like, as far as the suspense and everything, I think that is many times in kind of speculative fiction or, like, fantastical elements, what we're doing is using, ghosts to represent something else, you know what I mean, inside of us, like maybe anxiety or like fear or like, like facing loss, we can do all of those things and use kind of like avatars, like a ghost to do that.
Yeah, neat. I'm excited that you're here, and I'm excited that you're part of the Spooky Middle Grade Author Group.
Yes.
Because I've known those folks now since the podcast debuted. How is it working? You collaborated for the original story, but I know you also support each other. How is it, and how important is it to have that group of authors, that support system?
It's really it's so vital. So I joined up, I think, like a little bit like maybe midway through last year. So I went through this whole journey without them, and now I have them. It's really unique, the thing that we're doing, and it's hard to explain what you're doing sometimes to people who aren't in the specific. So just to be able to have a group of people who you can kind of like shorthand with, and who have maybe the same experiences with, like, editors or publications or agents or all of it. It's just kind of a language. It's like jargon, it's in and of itself. And they're so creative and so supportive. I feel lucky beyond measure to be a part of their group.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Nicole wants to know, when deciding to write a sequel in the Thelma B. story, did the idea come to you easily? Did the story change as you wrote it?
So, I think the idea did come to me relatively easily for the second book, but it changed tremendously as I wrote it. And I wrote the first draft years ago, and since then, I've changed as a person. And when I revisit it, and I was like, okay, like let's make this second book happen. I feel like it is really a different book, even though it has the same story pillars, because I understood her so much more. And I think that in the second book, 2020 was an interesting year for everyone. Mm-hmm. And I kind of, as I was writing and revising, I think that a piece of my experience in 2020 kind of made it into the second book, which was definitely not there in the first draft, with that idea of okay, what happens when the people who, the things that are supposed to be there and all set, and you just go ABC and you're done, and then all of a sudden, those ABCs aren't there anymore, and you have to start being okay, what's the right move? What's the right, and the way that you do that, and the way that Thelma has to do that, because the rug gets kind of pulled out from under her in the second book, is she has to, really dig deep and really start to trust her own instincts. Even though she's only 11 and a half, you know what I mean? Even though she's just a kid. And the only way to save the day is to, really trust that she can make the right decisions and do the right things for her family, her friend group, her whole town, and that element of it, which is a really important emotional arc for her, that wasn't even there in the first draft of it. So yeah, it changed tremendously. Yeah.
I'm always interested when an author tells me, I had no idea what she was going to do. I had no idea who. I knew that the character was this way, but then she took the story off, and I just watched it along. Do you ever kind of feel like that?
On the best days, yes. On the very best days. There's actually a character, I don't think you guys have, if you're in the first chapter, you haven't met her yet. There's a character named Mencken in this book, and she turns out to be a really important character. And I remember the day I was writing it, and Mencken showed up. And I was like, hey, first of all, interesting name. Secondly, who invited you here? But she was just there, and then all of a sudden she started, playing a role. And now it's she's this huge part of the story, and she's a huge part of the second book, and she just showed up one day uninvited. And that was a really cool moment, because I was like, you're here to stay. Awesome,
It's still hard for me to go, but you're typing. How did she show up without permission? But I love it. I do understand, because as a performer being on stage, there have been times on stage where people come up to me and go, that was so good when you did that. How long have you been doing that? I goes, just 30 seconds ago. That was it. That just came to me. Wow. So after Thelma B, and there's one more book. There's the book out now. Book 2 is coming out.
September, yes.
September. There's going to be a trilogy?
Yes, I'm going to wrap it up in the third book.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you think it would be hard to say goodbye to Thelma B at the end of that third book?
Yes.
Yeah.
I do. And I think that she really, it's... I think it was maybe a coworker of my mom's or something at one point said that she read the book and she felt after the book she felt she had to say goodbye to her friends, and I kind of feel like that too. It'll be kind of, because I'm even disassociating I'm in the book. I want that to be the feeling, because even when I'm writing it, that's the feeling that these are your friends, these are my friends, these are our collective friends, these are the friends that would have been clutch to have in 6th grade. Oh my gosh, if these guys had my back in 6th grade, I would have felt invincible. And I want my readers to feel like that when they're reading it. I want them to feel empowered by their new friends. So yes, when I kind of separate from the last words of the last book, I'll definitely feel a little bummed, but can always read it again.
Yeah. Hey, what's the main message that you want kids or adults who love reading middle grade books to walk away from when they're finished?
I want, and I think that starting to write with a message is not the right move, but I definitely finished with one. Mm-hmm. The things about you that make you feel weird or maybe a little uncomfortable sometimes, or you just wish could stop being weird and start being normal, those things about you are your superpowers. Those things deserve light. Those things deserve oxygen and love. And like when you get to be an older person, when you're not 11 and 12 and 13 years old anymore, you're going to realize that your strength is in your weirdness all the time. And I think that's what Thelma's got to offer. Yeah.
Hey, I want to thank you, Erin, for being with us today. Can you give Erin a nice big round of applause? Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Laura Lavoie. She'll be here to celebrate her beautiful picture book. It's called Vampire's Vacation. It's a really, really fun interview. You don't want to miss it. Hey, if you're the author of a fantastic children's book, we would love to help you spread the word about your book. Our monthly promotion program is a great way to do that. We can celebrate your book with commercials here on the podcast, with messages to our 90,000 plus social media followers, display your book in our nationwide network of digital pedestrian billboards, and display your book at one of our exciting live events. In July of 2022, participants in our promotion program will have their books displayed at the Association for Teacher Educators Convention in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm really excited about that. Look, think about that. You get a chance to have your book displayed to thousands of educators from all around the United States and all around the world. To learn more, go to readingwithyourkids.com, click on the author's Click Here button at the top of the page, and scroll on down to promotion programs. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Chris, I want to start by thanking our guest, Erin Petti. Please be sure to check out the peculiar hauntings of Thelma B. Also want to thank our host, the proprietor of the beautiful Books and Sundry shop in Plymouth, Massachusetts, Glenda Richards. Glenda, thank you so very, very much for opening up your bookstore to us. It's a beautiful place. It's right in downtown Plymouth, Massachusetts, right across the street from the water. There's great places to eat. There's down the street from Plymouth Rock and the Mayflower. There's easy parking. You're just going to love it. It's a beautiful shop. Check it out. Books and Sundry, Plymouth, Massachusetts. Please be sure you let Glenda know that you heard about the shop and heard our visit to her shop with Erin Petti. Also want to thank our sponsors, Leah Fisher. Please be sure to check out the Cryptid Catcher. And, of course, The Adventures of Harry and Friends by Sarah Belisa Tucker. I want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Nicole Belcastro, Ashley Contouris, Mirabella Q, Rain Pan. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.